institute, among others, breeding all red cows and clothes of the high priest and the golden menorah, things like that. But the timing is not quite right yet. But if you take this basic principle, if the literal sense makes sense, seek no other sense, otherwise you get nonsense. If the literal sense makes sense, seek no other sense, a non-literal sense, otherwise you get nonsense. You can make the Bible mean anything you want it to mean. If you take those key passages in a literal sense way, the third temple will be built before Messiah returns, and so it will happen. And we can see evidence that it's happening, but of course the Temple Mount is under the control of, is it Jordan? King of Jordan? So that would cause a furor in the Islamic world. And so that it's not ready yet to happen, but it will. What else? Brenda. I really prefer questions. This is Ask the Rabbi, not... I'm sorry, what? I got the question. Why do I think they are bringing COVID back? Okay, I understand. So in one sense, they are not bringing COVID back. COVID has escaped into the population, and it's, in one sense, it would be like, why are they bringing flu back? Or why are they bringing the common cold back? Once a virus escapes into the population, it's very hard to eliminate. Why are the big pharmaceutical companies pushing vaccines? Money, end of story. My brother-in-law David just got COVID. He's just getting over it. It's definitely coming back. Martha, Ari, and I were all really sick about 3 weeks ago, a month ago. I am pretty sure it was COVID. So, I had it before. I almost died from it. It was really bad the first time. It wasn't as bad for me this time, but I think it was COVID. I tested for it with the old testing kit. Didn't test positive, but I still think it was COVID. Yeah, it's going around again. It's that time, it's that time of the year, flu season, COVID season. And of course, the pharmaceuticals made billions. Of course, they're not going to let that cash cow die, Raymond. Will the state of Israel be enlarged if what? Okay, so if more Jewish people go back to Israel, will they enlarge it? As far as land-wise. Well, Jordan, which borders Israel, would not be in favor of that. Lebanon, which borders Israel, would not be in favor of that. Syria and the Golan Heights, which are right there, would not be in favor of that. You can't just enlarge the borders, right? So,
but there is prophecy. But there is prophecy, I can't remember if it's Isaiah, it might be Ezekiel because I just finished Ezekiel, that talks about what the borders of Israel will be in Messiah's day, in that 1,000 years. And it says, from the river of Egypt to the great river, which means the Euphrates. So the borders will increase, but it won't be our doing, it'll be Messiah's doing.
Yes, God promised, in Genesis, this piece of land to Abraham's physical descendants, the Jewish people. The boundaries and borders are given. They are much larger than they are today. Even when the kingdom of Israel was at its greatest power under David, followed by Solomon, who was the greatest extent, I don't believe that promise of, land to all those boundaries and borders were ever fulfilled. So when King Messiah returns, Jewish people are going to be regathered from around the world. We are going to return en masse to Israel, and the borders of Israel will be extended in fulfillment of those promises that God made to Abraham and reaffirmed in other places. Bob, do I remember 1938? I was not alive at that time, so I do not remember it. The Nazis claimed that the Jewish people what? I didn't hear you. Had disease. And your point is what? Disease? I guess I'm still not following you. Yes, there's diseases throughout the world. So what connection are you trying to make? Bob, can you come up here? My hearing is unfortunately not as good as it used to be. For some strange reason. That's okay. So what about the Nazis and disease, and what's the connection with today?
Well, today, how they're using disease as a way to overrule law.
Okay, so the Nazis focused on disease as a way to push forward their autocratic agenda. And you see similar things today, right? There was a huge autocratic response from many governments to COVID, and they did it because of this national health emergency, right? Lockdowns, and the question is, were these lockdowns justified? Like in China, these lockdowns went to extreme, absurd excesses. Would it surprise me if authoritarian governments used disease or something else to take our freedoms away? Of course not, wouldn't surprise me. This is what authoritarians do. They'll seize on anything. Did you hear about the governor, I think, of New Mexico last week? There's been a real increase in crimes and gun violence, and she declared that in the state of New Mexico, there was a statewide health emergency. These guns were causing a health emergency. And she banned guns from greater Albuquerque, which is the main city in New Mexico, under the guise of a health emergency. Of course, the Second Amendment of the Constitution can't be overruled by a health emergency declared by a governor. So she was widely criticized, even by her members of her own Democratic Party. We live in a time when it is foolish to trust your government. I think it's always been that way, unless you were under a government led by King David. But other than that, you should have a very healthy skepticism of government and their agendas, right? Especially right now. In fact, I was just reading that this is actually a good thing. Americans, something like, I don't know, 18%, 12% of Americans trust their government. And they're not worthy of our trust at this point, so that's good. Vanessa? Okay, so Vanessa's making the point that these health emergencies seem hypocritical while we're allowing hundreds of thousands of illegal aliens to come into the country with tuberculosis and other terrible diseases, and we're not quarantining them and testing them, right? It seems insane, because it is insane and hypocritical. Michaela, you have a question?
So in studying the New Testament, I heard that during like this battle between good and evil, there's going to be, it was described as these creatures with women's hair and like a scorpion's tail. Is that a metaphor for a demon or?
Okay, so Michaela has a question from the book of Revelation. There's these horrible locusts, I think they're locust scorpion creatures with stings in their tail. They're unleashed. It's like a plague on humanity, very painful stings, and they have hair like a woman. What are these things? Are they real? Or is it some kind of demonic entity? I'm not sure. What do you think? They could be, I think, scholars go both ways on that they're, some sort of evil, demonic thing, or maybe they're a real thing. Not sure. But I hope not to find out in person. Is it scary? Yes. The book of Revelation is scary. A lot of scary things in the book of Revelation. And God is designing it to be scary and painful because actually He's doing it out of love and out of justice. He loves humanity enough that when someone is headed in a terrible, dark direction, He will push back. He will let that individual, that nation suffer real hardship, real pain, which will cause them to repent and wake up. So that is really magnified to the max in the book of Revelation. It's like the light is getting so bright and the darkness is getting so dark. Like, good and evil are battling for the soul of humanity. And so the levels are being upped. Evil is going all out, but God is going all out. And He is allowing suffering and pain to bring repentance and redemption. If you read the history of the Jewish people in the Tanakh, the Hebrew Scriptures, and what the prophet said, God uses defeat and death and disasters to punish and humble a wicked nation and individuals. He does it because it's right, because they have brought it on themselves, it's just, and He does it as an act of love. Often His punishments are redemptive. He brings good out of His discipline, corrections, punishment. Very important principle. Shelley. Doesn't the Bible say not to call yourself rabbi? Yes. It also says that no man should be called father. Shelley, did you have a father? You had a biological father. Shelley. How could you say that? Calling some man father. It also says, call no man leader, call no one leader. Do you believe that there are leaders? Okay, so when the literal sense makes sense, seek no other sense, otherwise you get nonsense. So I don't believe that Messiah is saying, don't ever use these titles, leader, rabbi, father. What he is saying is there's not a strict hierarchy like there was under the Sinai covenant. There were priests and there were regular people. And if you were a priest, you were a priest. You were a descendant of, Aaron, the brother of Moses, and they were the spiritual leaders of Israel. And no one could become a priest unless you were born into the, family of Aaron. Under Messiah's new covenant, there's a radical change from the Mosaic Sinai covenant structure of the nation of Israel and what we are today. We are brothers and sisters. There is a tremendous equality that we have. There is not a strict clergy, laity thing going on in Messiah's community. You and I are brother and sister. We're all equals. We are all sons and daughters of God. We all have a great equality, right? There's neither Jew nor Gentile, male nor female, slave nor free, right? So that is what Messiah is saying. We conduct ourselves with humility. We don't exalt ourselves. We don't claim great titles of authority over others. It doesn't mean that there aren't leaders, that there aren't fathers, that there aren't spiritual leaders, whether you call them rabbis, pastors, priests, reverends. It's not about the titles. It's about the equality. Being a spiritual leader, you and I are the same. But if you are part of Shema and you are a member of our congregation, I am your spiritual leader. I lead. And if I tell you something, you don't just ignore it and say, you're my equal. If I tell you, you keep doing this, and I'm going to kick you out of here. I'm going to excommunicate you. I'm going to withhold the Lord's Supper from you. You don't say to me, you have no authority to do that. You and I are equals. No, God ordains and raises up spiritual leaders and gives them a lot of spiritual authority. But there's still a great equality. So I have to be a humble servant leader. That's what it means. So in the Jewish community, we call our spiritual leaders rabbis. The Catholic community, they call their spiritual leaders priests, fathers. It used to bother me that Catholics would call their, leaders fathers. Call no man father, right? Except Paul, he said, you don't have many fathers, but I'm your true father. So Paul did not take the words of Yeshua in a literal way either there. And if you do a study on the word father, that's a repeated thing in the New Testament, being someone's spiritual father. So again, it's more, there's a great equality, there's not a caste system, priests, and laity. That's what's going on. It's not about, you can call me pastor, but it's bad if you call me rabbi. Raymond, king of the mountain. Can't hear you. God promised, made a covenant with David that one of his descendants, one of his family line would always sit on the throne of on David's throne, be the rightful king of Israel. And for the next 500 years, there were literal descendants of David on the throne of Israel. We were conquered by the Babylonians and lost independent rule. After that time, there has not been another descendant of David ruling the Jewish people. Around the 2nd century BC, there were other kings, like King Herod, right? He was not a direct descendant of David. So how is this covenant promise to David going to be understood? When God restores Israel to what it should be and makes Israel into a kingdom, which it will be, not a democracy, not a republican form of government. It's going to be a kingdom. A descendant of David will rule over Israel, and not just Israel, will rule over every nation in the world. That ultimate descendant, of course, is King Yeshua. That's how it's to be understood. Now, it's interesting, just a little bit of history. The descendants of David were still known after, even though they weren't kings, they were still identifiable. Joseph knew he was a descendant of David, which means the brothers of Yeshua, like James and others, were descendants of David. They were both in the Messianic Jewish movement, like descendants of David, were given very high honor. James, the brother of Jesus, became the leader of the Jerusalem congregation, not just because he was a super godly man and a brother of Yeshua, but he was also a descendant of King David. He was royalty. And in the Jewish community for hundreds of years after that, even like in Babylon, which became the center of the Jewish community, descendants of David were recognized and honored and known. So I don't know if it's possible to identify them today. I think that might be lost, although I do know someone, a Jewish guy, a believer, who claims that he knows that his lineage goes back to King David. That's, his family history, he says. Can he prove it? No. Anything else? Ask the rabbi. Anne. Anne says she can't restrain herself. She wants to talk about money, finances, economics. The debt in the United States is out of control. Are we on the edge of the next great economic crisis? I feel that we are, for a lot of reasons. The debt in the United States is out of control. Here's a statistic. In the past month, 6 weeks, we've gone $1 trillion further into debt. $1 trillion. That might not seem like a lot anymore, $1 trillion. But I think it took 170 years from the founding of our country till the nation reached $1 trillion in debt, something like 150, 170 years. It took us to rack up $1 trillion in debt. We just racked up that same amount in like 6 weeks. So the debt has gone exponential, right? Exponential curve, like straight up. It's totally out of control. Japan the global economy is clearly in a recession already. Japan, they're in terrible trouble. Their currency, the yen, is showing signs of extreme distress. China created the biggest bubble in human history, financial bubble, with their real estate market, which is now collapsing, China. And it's dragging down their banks and their shadow banks, because their banks and shadow banks gave money for mortgages. And that was the biggest moneymaker in the Chinese economy, is their real estate market, now imploding. Similar to what happened to our subprime crisis in 2008, but theirs is so much larger. So China is imploding. Europe and Germany in particular are in recession, and everyone is still racking up massive amounts of debt. They're paying for, they're just, why aren't we in more of a recession now? Because the government, Americans are spending less, prices are higher, inflation, they created all this money, right? It's harder to, people are foregoing, houses are out of reach for most people, even a car is out of reach for most people. They're cutting back on spending, vacations, right? Airbnbs. The middle class is getting systematically destroyed by inflation. All this money printed over the past 15, 20 years. Why aren't we in more of a recession? Because the government is making up for our lack of spending by going further into debt, creating more money and just shoveling it into Wall Street and everywhere. Right? We just crossed $33 trillion in debt. It's out of control, though. It's not sustainable. Interest rates are going up. They're getting to critical levels, the cost of money. Right? Big moves in interest rates around the world this past week. This is not a sustainable situation. It's going to crash. It is going, I'm telling you. And things are accelerating, things are getting much worse. Something is going to happen, I think, soon. Be prepared. You can feel it. If you're into this stuff, you can sense it. You can feel it building. The fragility is getting, more extreme. Raymond, louder. Raymond made an interesting observation that every great civilization, every great empire in history has ultimately failed for various reasons, very frequently because they went massively into debt. And that's a very common reason why empires fail. They go broke, they get too ambitious, they send out the army to too many wars, too many outposts, right? Too much taxes. We are following the same exact pattern as particularly Rome. The fall of the Roman Empire and the fall of the American Empire are very comparable. Yes, I think we are seeing the end of the American Empire, and the other nations of the world know our weakness too. The BRICS nations, Russia, China, and 60 other nations, they all see our bankruptcy and printing money and losing in Afghanistan, and we haven't won a war, since World War II, right? They see, and the corruption and the perversion, they are turned off by our transgenderism and LGBTQ+. Most of the nations are sickened by it, like we are, and they've had enough. They're putting their own plans into place, Plan B, for the fall of America and the fall of the dollar. Of course. And you should be too. And you buy gold and silver if you can afford it, and you have a month's worth of, a month's worth of food, maybe more. I mean, you got to be crazy at this point not to. Brenda, and I want to wrap this up soon. Why do they push the LGBTQ agenda? Because the liberals, progressives are basically atheists, and they want to, what does liberal mean? Well, they want to liberate. It started off, they wanted to liberate us from like real injustices, mistreatment of women, mistreatment of blacks and Jews, mistreatment of the poor, the rich, soaking up all the wealth and, taking advantage of average workers and, right? Those were good things, liberating us from that. But they want to also liberate us from God. They want to liberate us from the Bible. They want to liberate us from morality. They want to liberate us from free market capitalism. So they're coming from a very different place. They don't fear God. They don't believe in God. They don't believe in heaven or hell, the day of judgment. They believe in the state. They believe in power. They believe, that they are the wise ones, the good ones. And so they are pushing forward their godless ASP agenda, atheism, socialism, perversion. They think Christianity and Judaism and the Bible and God and morality are evil, twisted, chains on us. We got to free us from God and normal sexuality. If you want to sleep with a man or a woman or a threesome, a foursome, whatever, it's not bad. Don't feel guilty. There's no God, there's no morality, there's no day of judgment, there's no accountability. Do what feels good to you. Do what feels right. And don't feel guilty. Don't let those Christians make you feel guilty. That is the mindset. Is that what made America great? No. That's what made Sodom and Gomorrah great. No, this is, all right, so often when empires collapse, they collapse not just militarily or economically, they collapse morally. They get decadent, they get perverse, they get, sick, like Rome did. Rob.
John Adams said the Constitution was written for a moral and religious people as holy men were for any other. In 1958, an FBI agent wrote a book called Naked Communist. In that book, he had a list called the goals of the communists. They included things like destruction of the family, introducing homosexuality and degeneracy as normal, natural, and healthy.
Okay, so what Bob is saying is he quoted, was it Samuel Adams that said, John Adams, who said, this Constitution is designed for a religious, moral people. Freedom, individual strength, small government, individual responsibility. There's hardly any place for a federal government in the Constitution. Very much individual strength and family and virtue and morality. So John Adams, one of the founding fathers, said, this Constitution is only fit for a religious, moral people. Well, we're no longer religious and no longer moral, and of course, we no longer really follow the Constitution hardly at all. And if you it's common knowledge amongst, progressive, leftist, socialist, communist circles that if you want to undermine a nation, you undermine its morality, you undermine its values, you slip in socialism, you undermine, right? So I think there has been a systematic attempt on the communist, socialist, progressive, left, liberal side to undermine traditional institutions and values in the United States and Western society for decades. Nope, that's enough. Anyone else? And I'm going to wrap things up. Vanessa. Okay, so now that now that they've won the culture war and these asps are in total control, atheist, socialist, perversion, they want to be liberal and right, tolerant, except for anyone who opposes them, anyone who disagrees with them. And so they're using their power in the media and government and academia to stamp out the opposition. So you got to use their perversion pronouns. Yeah, they're completely intolerant of the moral, the righteous, the godly, the Bible-based. That is, it's not. They don't want just tolerance. They are demanding that we all fall into their ideas and their agenda. And they're using all their power and their means to suppress the opposition, crush the opposition, right? Okay, so I think there's a growing revulsion on the part of more and more Americans. They've pushed us too far. They've taken this too far. They've been too oppressive, too censoring, canceling anyone, right? I think there's finally some pushback, like the Bud Light transgender Dylan Mulvaney thing. People will only take this to a certain level, and then rebel, seek out alternatives. So I suspect that is what is going on. Also, only a rich nation can spend a lot of time and energy on this kind of nonsense. When we are in the midst of the next Great Depression, which I think is going to be very soon, everyone's broken and be struggling to survive. I don't think there's going to be time or energy to push these bizarre, sick things. At least that's what I'm hoping. All right, I want to cut it off there. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father and our King, thank you for a stimulating Ask the Rabbi session on this Sabbath of repentance and this fall equinox. Bless us, fill us with your Spirit. Help us to be alive to you, dead to sin, aware of you, alert to you, living for you, serving you with joy and gladness, living for you, not for the world, living for you, not for ourselves. Amen. Shabbat Shalom.